Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to go over a lot of the second half of the first years of life in chapter 7 of the Brain Facts book. So let's take a trip back to when you were 2 years old. I don't know if you guys remember, but in the last video, I mentioned something about the growth rate of the brain, and we talked about the sizes in comparison to the adult brain. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the last video, but let's just take a quick speed forward to when you're 5 years old, right? When you're 5 years old, your brain is 90% of size of the adult brain. 90% seems like a pretty big amount, right? But it leaves 10% of scope for your brain to grow and expand into becoming the actual adult brain, which is actually a lot because your brain has so many, like tens of millions of synapses, trillions, in fact. And 90% would mean that you still have 10 trillion synapses almost left to create and connect. So although it seems like it's a very small amount, it's very, very big when you look at it microscopically. So now that we've gotten kind of a perspective of what it seems to be 90% of the adult brain, let's take a look back at why 2 years of age is so important. Well, at 2 years of age, your brain has 50% more connections than the adult brain, while only being about 80% of the adult brain size. So, if you were to put this mathematically, you're at 2 years of age, your brain has a higher synaptic density. In other words, per unit area or per unit of brain, you have way more synapses in that one region in comparison to your adult. So if you were to compare it, say that this square represents the child's brain, and this square represents the adult brain. And for our purposes, let's assume that they're the same size. Okay, so this is 1 unit squared of the brain, and this is 1 unit squared of the brain. Same size. And this represents one dot in this, one blue dot will represent one neuron. Or actually better phrased, one synapse. Remember, a synapse actually represents two neurons. And this one in a 2 year, sorry, okay. This blue dot will represent one synapse in a 2-year-old, whereas this one will represent one synapse in an adult. Okay, that took a little bit longer than it should have, but we got there eventually. Okay, so in a 2-year-old, there's going to be so many dots, like crazy, crazy, crazy amount of dots. Notice just haywire, okay? But in the adult brain, there's going to be a lot. Don't get me wrong. The adult brain will have a lot, but that's it. So what can you see if you guys compare this, right? You guys can see that there's a lot more units in the same area in comparison to a fewer units per 1 unit area. And just let's think about why that could be, right? Why do you guys think this might be the case? Well, the explanation for that is synaptogenesis. You guys have probably heard this word before. I mentioned it in the last lecture as well. But if you break down the word synaptogenesis, it quite literally translates to the creation of synapses. Oops, sorry. That's synapsis, not synapses or something. Okay. Synapses. Okay, there we go. So synaptogenesis means the creation of synapses. And what your brain does, right, is in the beginning of life, it overgenerates the amount of synapses. So it makes too many synapses. And this may seem pretty efficient, right? Like, okay, you create synapses for every small thing you learn. You create a synapse for everything you see, everything you hear, everything, there's a synapse for it. But there's a problem with this. Can you guys guess what the problem is? I'll give you a hint. In order for you to maintain a synapse, it requires a certain amount of energy input. Do you guys see the problem now? Well, let's spell it out. It's too much energy for the brain to handle. Let me take out some of my drawings here. Um, okay, so maintaining a synapse requires the input of a certain amount of energy. And if you have too many synapses, that's too much energy for the brain to maintain, especially considering the fact that a lot of the synapses that we form when we are born or when we are toddlers do not make it past that age, right? We often lose so many of these synapses because we don't use them. We don't use a lot of the early synapses. And what our brain has done is it's come up with a very interesting mechanism that takes place in the age range of mostly in the age range of 2 to 10 years, which is a process known as synaptic pruning. So this takes place from around 2 to 10 years. And for the lack of a better definition, you guys can think of it as mass killings of synapses. Of synapses. Basically, it eliminates large portions of synapses on the basis of less used, eliminated first. Or so basically, if that synapse isn't used very much or those synapses are not used, those are immediately just the energy input for that synapse will be reduced and reduced to the point where the synapse just dies. And this is also the basis of synaptic plasticity, which is something that we covered in chapter 4, right? Synaptic plasticity means the way that your brain kind of remodels and learns. So synapses are only maintained when you use them the most. So that's why a lot of the memories that you have from your childhood, you really don't tend to remember. Have you guys ever thought of why people say, oh, in Telugu, there's a saying actually where it's like "uha vachindi," and "uha" literally translates to consciousness, or in other words, a vivid memory. So basically, we say that Telugu people say at least that you don't really remember anything from when you are an infant to 4 or even 3 to 4 years old. That's when you actually start remembering things. And if you guys look kind of closely, you really don't start forming memories. Some of your earliest memories usually start from when you're 4 or 5. That was when I have my earliest memories. And of course, I have a few flashbacks of when I was like 2, seeing a few things when I was 2. But there's a reason we don't remember these things, and that's because of synaptic pruning. We get rid of bulks of memories because we don't really use them. So that's why synaptic pruning is so important because it's the solution for too much energy that is formed by way too much synaptogenesis that happens at 2 years of age, right? And now looking back here, at 5 years old, your brain is 90% of the adult brain size. Remember, that's an important statistic. And at 2 years of age, your brain has 50% more connections than the adult brain, while only being 80% of the size of the adult brain. And remember, this happens because of synaptogenesis. But synaptogenesis, if you have too many synapses, that's too much for the brain to maintain. So, what it does is it commits kind of mass eliminations of synapses. And it does it on the basis of less used is eliminated faster, which is why you conserve a few skills that you learned in childhood, but at the same time, you don't remember a lot of things from your childhood because your brain is constantly removing those memories that you don't really use. And a prime example of this is like your memories, one, but also addition. Have you guys ever thought of why you haven't forgotten addition yet? Well, addition is something you learn when you're in kindergarten, right? That's the first skill that you learn. But the thing is, you keep using it over and over and over again. You use it in first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way even until BC calculus, right? And because of this, your brain cannot forget it and synaptic pruning does not happen to the synapse because your brain keeps using it. And therefore, your brain realizes that, okay, this is good enough to keep investing energy in. And that's why addition you keep remembering. Whereas memories such as trips in as a baby, you don't remember because as a baby, you don't keep recollecting memories of that trip unless it was really traumatizing or it was really, really fun or you were really happy in that moment. You don't really keep remembering those moments, right? So that's why you tend to forget memories, but you tend to remember addition. If that makes sense. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. And yeah, bye.